Hello and welcome to another Museum FAQ video. I'm delighted to be joined again by Kathy McLean, back by popular demand, as they say. Hi, Kathy. How are you doing?
Hi, Paul. How are you? I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well.
Good.
Today is snowy Long Island, as we discussed before we started recording. Um, So, Kathy, maybe for folks, the few folks who don't know you, maybe you could introduce yourself a little bit and then we could launch into our conversation.
Okay.
it'll, all, it'll all get easier after this.
Yeah, I know it's the introduce yourself that's always the. I've been working in museums, primarily exhibitions and public programs, since 1974. So you do the math; it's a long time, and I'm still at it. And I'm happy to say I still get a lot of excitement and energy out of it, even though I've become one of the old curmudgeons, and I say, I'm one of the, back in the old days, we used to walk to school barefooted in the snow. Um, but there's some interesting developments coming along, and so I thought this might be a nice time to talk about. We talked early on and just about, we were both still, I think, stunned and shocked by what just happened, and we were talking about good eggs and bad actors, which I thought was a really good thing that was coming out of just our experience in the quarantine and with the virus. So here we are now, almost a year later, I guess.
Yeah.
9 months later.
And maybe that's a good way for people who want the Reader's Digest version of our video, but it's worth going back to look at it. But we did conclude on the sort of statement and feeling that you want to work with good eggs and not bad actors. So that's, I think maybe that's something that fits both of our MOs in terms of our work. Seek out the good eggs, not the bad actors. But in the interim, and we all, of course, hope that things would sort themselves out a lot more quickly than they obviously have, not least of which for museums. But in a way, the universe has pressed this cosmic reset button and given museums and museum people the thing maybe they complain about the most. We don't have enough time to do what we want to do, and now be careful what you wish for. You got a lot of time, and now maybe the start of this conversation is, well, what have we done with that time? What have museum people done with that time? What do we hope to do with that time, continuing, moving forward? And a phrase that has been used, which I like, but it's also a little dangerous, these phrases, these catchphrases, but the idea of next practices instead of best practices, which I think we both agree best practices makes us both either itch or squirm, or it gives us discomfort. So maybe let's talk about next practices, and since I'm talking to you from your point of view, what museums should be doing, or what we could be doing more of, or what, as we're hopefully crossing the boundary with COVID, moving forward in a positive way. What kinds of things should we be doing? So I've given you a very small, narrow window to talk about, but nevertheless, let's get started and see where we go with it.
Okay, it's a big question. I think what I've been spending my time doing, I'm still working with museums, but we're doing everything online. And so there have been some opportunities that surprised me about being online. some major cautions about that as well. But what I think I've noticed with museums in particular is that there seems to be, it's not really, it's an unspoken vibe that I'm getting. Everybody's willing to stand up and spend, you know, people are spending a lot of time writing letters of support or Black Lives Matter statements, and you know, really being being part of the chorus of change agents. But the practice itself doesn't seem to be changing to me. So we have a lot of lip service going on, but people are doing the same thing. And when you said, you know, people are always saying, I don't have enough time. And so now people have had time. What have you been doing? Well, what I'm finding is most museum people haven't had a lot of time, are at least saying they're so busy they can't see straight. They have Zoom, you know, they've got Zoom crisis going on in terms of, or Zoom phobia, because all they do is spend their time in Zoom meetings. So many museum people have said, oh, I have more meetings now than I ever had when we were open and working. And it just seems to me like there's something really wrong with that picture. And what it indicates to me is that probably most museums are willing to say they're interested in change, but they're not real. They're waiting. They're treading water.
Yeah, I mean, you and I can both agree that the museum business is great at talking a great game, but not always so good about acting on the talk. You know, walk the walk, not just talk the talk. And
Exactly.
also, I wholeheartedly agree with you that despite the fact that again, people might say, well, we can't go back to the way things were before, or we're in the new normal, or whatever they say. It certainly seems, as you indicate, that there are people who are just like, well, if we could just hold on a little bit longer, we really, you know, we can go back to the way it was before. So let's just, I'm gonna put my thumb on the scale here as the interviewer, so to speak, or co-conversant really is a better way of saying it, and say let's leave that all aside for now, and
Yes.
let's talk about maybe some examples through your work, or you certainly come in contact with museums and museum people all over the world. Maybe what are some positive examples that might serve as models of organizations or people actually walking the walk, actually doing next practices?
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
I hate to be snide, but there will always be, in every profession, people who are good at talking the talk and not walking the walk. You know,
Yeah.
good luck and Godspeed. Maybe I'll leave it to the viewer to decide whether those people are good eggs or bad actors. You know, let them decide. But let's us talk about some examples that might serve as models or inspiration for people from your work, people whose work you know, other museum professionals you know, because otherwise we will go down that very quick slide to, yeah, boy, the museum business is rotten, and they just talk about things they've been talking about this stuff for 40, you know. Let's talk about some. I mean, I don't want to be Pollyanna-ish, but I also would rather give people some positive models and say, boy, this really struck me as people actually doing a next practice, or doing something that struck me as. So sorry.
I agree.
Now I'll take my thumb off the scale and mute my microphone and give you a chance.
No, this is all really, this is a good setup for what we need to talk about, because I think it's we have to I think we have to model the behavior, right? We can sit here and complain about museums till the cows come home. But really what we need to do is say, okay, how do we think differently about all of this? How do we take action? How do we manage ourselves and our creativity in this time? And I think it comes down, for me, it comes down to four domains of that we should be focusing our inquiry on, or our focusing our brains on now. Like just say to ourselves, okay, the world, like I love that the universe pushed a major reset button. Okay, now in this mode of it was still unknowing what lies ahead, how do we even get a handle on what to do next? And I think it comes down to there are kind of four major realms. One is the realm of values, and that's we need to be reconsidering, reevaluating, redefining for ourselves, and checking our own assumptions about what life as in best practices has always been. And it seems like there are the values proposition is one that does fall into the camp of talking the talk, not necessarily walking it. And I think that museums are really good at that. And everybody's out rewriting their mission statements, rewriting their value statements, writing support letters about Black Lives Matter, all of that stuff. And that's important to do, to kind of say, what are our values? What do we need to change? What do we need to do to support our values and make them more evident in the world? But then there's three other domains we should be focusing on.
Okay, but just before we let slide values again, of course, I hear many of our younger colleagues in the background saying, yeah, whose values?
Exactly.
So I don't want to break the flow, but I just say.
Okay, no, exactly. Good. And but I think that's it's necessary work, but we can spend all our time there. And yes, whose values? But I think the other three areas that I think are more practical and more pragmatic and more tangible that we can actually take action on are where we should be right now putting our energy.
Proceed.
Okay, so let's set values can sit right here, and we'll come back to that because in every single aspect that they keep coming back. And I think the fundamental thing is, yeah, whose values? And I found it very interesting today that interesting but not surprising that the GOP is now, a number of the GOP members are rejecting the idea of the Native American woman being the Department of Interior Secretary. And I'm thinking, here we are, it's really right down to, it's always been kind of behind closed doors or whispers, but here we are. Here's a woman eminently qualified. It would change everything to have a Native American woman who is a progressive, very in touch with the world person in charge of the department, the Secretary of the Interior. Brilliant. That's everybody saying that, oh yeah, the values, but when it comes right down to it, here we are.
Well, that's, we don't want to get too deep into politics, but I'll just insert parenthetically, of course, the reason some people are against it is that it would change everything. But that's another whole story. Yeah. So what about item number 2?
Okay. In museum work, there are 3 arenas that we can look at. Role, and I've said this before, but it's become more crystal clear to me than ever. Roles, our roles, the roles that everybody plays, our processes, how we do things, and our relationships, who we engage with and how. And those 3 areas of practice need a lot of scrutiny, redefinition and reconsideration, reevaluation. And I really mean it this time. I think our roles have stuck us in, the 1950s. We're still operating out of the 1950s in terms of roles and expectations, and we have to shift that. And this is
I thought you were going to say 1850s, but that's good. 1950s. Okay.
Yeah. The roles were a little different in the 1850s. But I think the 1950s is a good, it's like the military industrial complex. It was back, it's the America that everybody talks about when they say make America great again, 1950s. That's all good. Yes. So, and we're acting out those roles. They're almost like archetypal roles, and we've taken them on and we act them out with this kind of passionate fervor to, to keep museums kind of as these models of high culture. And the process is how we do these things is so important. And then who are our people? Who are our go-to people? Who are the people that are doing this with us? And I think that the next practices, what we can be doing now, since we don't really know what lies ahead still, it's still, I think, not the time to be doing strategic planning in the old formal way of saying, okay, here are our opportunities, here are our strengths and limitations, and let's do an action plan based on what we project in the future. That's like another kind of old way of thinking. We need we can, as we can get together as a staff and say, okay, what are our assumptions about our roles? What if we changed roles? What if we brought in some people who knew nothing about what we're doing and they took on certain roles? Or what if we broke roles up differently? It's a way of, you could say tomorrow for 8 hours, we're going to actually do other people's jobs. I mean, this is not new. This was like big, this was really big in business in the 80s to do a day in somebody else's job so that you have a better sense of the whole organization. But they're kind of tangible, real things we could do. Like I'm thinking, if you took on a different role, what might you do in the same job work that you're doing, developing exhibitions? You could conceivably say, okay, I'm going to ask so-and-so to do what I normally do, and I'm going to do what so-and-so normally does. And don't you think that might, even if you just did it for a day, and then reflect on what happened, that might open you up to new ways of thinking?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's the sort of, well, it's funny. It's like the classic, before I criticize someone, I should walk a mile in their shoes. Of course, the old joke is,
yeah.
Then I have their shoes and they're a mile away when I criticize them. But that's yes, I think that's so. I think again, I'm thinking now. Here are our colleagues who feel battered and burdened, and many of our colleagues who, some of them unfortunately have lost jobs or been furloughed or stuff. So I think, okay, roles. So I wrote this down. Okay, so we want to rethink our roles and our processes and our relationships. Okay, that sounds good to me. And naturally, I think the immediate next question from people is, okay, so how am I going to do that? Or like going back to what I was thinking about earlier, okay, well, museum people are great at saying, well, show me somebody else who has done this so that I have something, I can share with my board or share with my coworkers. Well, this isn't just some half-baked idea. This has actually worked in XYZ institution or this exhibition process, so on and so forth.
I think there's some value to using examples, and there are a couple of examples I'll throw out to you. But I also think using I think that that's an excuse not to try something. Why, if you know, if we're talking about you want to do something new, why do I have to show you an example that somebody else has already
Uh,
done it before?
now we're getting into the real meat of the matter here, because yeah, we have this tricky conundrum,
Yeah.
because yes, we want to be doing next practices, not best practices. So
Why should I
you
be
know,
giving you examples that people are doing it? Because maybe you need to come up with a totally different way. And maybe, and not even maybe about it. I think if we thought of ourselves as a field that embraced experimentation and reflection and learning from each other, that we could all try different things. And then we could throw them out there and say, well, this didn't work. Why? Because of this and this. And if we saw enough of that, we might be able to find some things that did work, or try to experiment yourself, and maybe this time that you made it work, and what was the new ingredient that you added to it. It's like we're all just saying, well, show us the examples of how this has been done before, but that's not how you
okay,
innovate.
fair, fair, fair enough.
So
But
here's one example. Here's one example that I just saw the other day that I thought was really quite brilliant. And I didn't even write it down because I watched it, and then it struck me days later that it was actually really interesting. And it was a theater company in, well, some of you may have seen it. It was on, I think it was on PBS NewsHour with Judy Woodruff, and they do a culture series, and it was a theater group, and I can't remember what town it was
all
in.
right, because we're in YouTube land, we'll have the link. We'll find the link and put it below.
Okay, we'll find the link. That's great. And what they decided was, here are all these actors out of work, and this is theater. Here are all these actors out of work. Here are all these people who are just really wanting to get out and be out. Oh, maybe it was in North Carolina somewhere, or South Carolina. And and because of all the closings of businesses, there were all these empty storefronts. So they put together a series where it was one or two actors, and you could sign up and go, and you stood outside, and the play was done in the storefront windows, so there was like no human contact. You stood far enough apart from each other. There were a few, not a lot of not huge audiences, but 6 or 7, 8, 10 people that would watch this thing. But and then you could go from one to the next, and they were short, and you could go from one to the next, and you could have this really creative time watching people perform, and watching live people perform, and having a few people around you to share things with. So a very micro kind of experience, but much more intimate. You're right there with the actors, and getting something that wasn't on a screen. And the more I think about it, the more I think those are the kinds of things we need to be thinking about, because we're so stuck, like in theater, we're so stuck to the big theater spaces that we've built, and having 400 people sitting in chairs all facing the screen. And if that's the construct, if that construct doesn't work, but you're stuck with that as the model of what we do, then we're not going to get anywhere.
So that that sounds like you would be very much aligned with a number of movements now that are saying, how can we do things without the physical museum? Like, how can we create community engagement experiences without a museum? Like, if it's a problem to get a lot of people in a museum during COVID times or pandemic times, okay, well, maybe the problem isn't just the pandemic. The problem is this mindset, the same thing you said about the theater construct. Okay, what if we deconstruct this and rethink our processes and our roles in that? So we'll include some links to those too, because I think that's very interesting. Also, I just feel compelled to mention something This is funny. Like now we'll be talking about things that happened before COVID times and after COVID times. But there was a wonderful event, performance event called the Mile Long Opera on the High Line in New York City that my wife and I were able to attend.
Oh, I want
And
to. I would love to do
it
that.
was amazing because it took the idea of an opera, the idea of these recurring themes and musical things, and it literally spread it out physically over the mile long distance of the High Line, and you could walk through at your own pace and linger or move up closer to people singing or saying things. And they used office buildings alongside the High Line, like you see this person cleaning in this open window space, like what you just described about the theater thing, and you realize, oh, and now these people are thinking about what this person. So it was a very nice experience, but it wouldn't be what I would immediately think of if I was thinking of opera, the Metropolitan Opera, hundreds of people facing the stage, and here comes the grand aria and all the rest of that. But yet it was an opera, and it was successful and maybe reached people who might not have traditionally engaged with opera in the same way that it was traditionally presented, just like what the example you gave of theater in storefront windows and so on. So,
And also, and that hits that little storefront window theater thing really did hit all, values, roles, processes, and relationships. The relationship between the actors and the audience changed slightly. There was still that relationship, but it also changed a bit in that you were closer to the actors, but they were behind glass. But all of those things can be they can be opportunities as well. And it was really looking at, okay, here's where we are right now: empty storefronts. Nobody can go out and get live entertainment. How can we turn that inside out? And I think there are possibly many examples of this. I think rather than that, and what I think a lot of museums did was they just went to, okay, we're going to put it all online, right? And okay, that's been tried. And there are lots of positions there about, and lots of opinions about whether that was successful or not. Well, what about, let's try some other things as well. I think that what we tend to do is we look for the best practices and say, oh, okay, now we're going to put everything online. So let's just, cut down the, let a few people in through the door and do everything else online.
I don't even know, and I'm not a big fan necessarily of digital to begin with, as you well know. I don't know if moving everything to digital was a best practice. I'm not even going to call that a best practice. I'm just going to call that was just like the easiest practice or the response to desperation practice. And that doesn't mean that there weren't positive things in a lot of ways that came out of that, but that's a whole different show. I might have that show at some point, like the aftermath of moving programs to online. But I think hearkening back to the example you gave of the storefront windows, and that was something that clearly as you said, changed the calculus about roles and processes and relationships, while keeping, I think it would be fair to say, while keeping the fundamental values of the theater company, trying to be responsive and provide artistic experiences, theatrical experiences to their communities. So,
and people paid for it. It wasn't, it used a lot of, it wasn't groundbreaking in terms of like the whole exchange model or whatever, it kept certain norms, kind of cultural norms. It stayed within cultural norms in some ways and then broke out of it in other ways. And I think what we're we need to do is to do more of that. Some people have done outdoor exhibits at a time, back when the weather was good for more, the weather was more equitably distributed for everyone. I mean, we could do that here in California. It's very sunny today. We could do outdoor exhibits easily.
We could do it. We could do it here on Long Island as long as people like a foot of snow and sub-zero temperatures. But some people do. So
yeah,
I suppose
you could do cross-country skiing. You could have little vitrines through the woods that you could go through, and there could be little displays.
Or things people drive through, I suppose.
Drive through experiences.
Well, I think these sort of 4 points, to that people could sort of fall back and consider are certainly useful ways to frame the conversation. But I'm gonna give you another little challenge here, which is, so how could we, or you, to somebody watching this, like really provide the sort of inspiration and the feeling that they could in their situation, whatever their situation is, big museum, small museum worker who right now does not have a job, how what's something that you could give people, some sort of giving you a big task again.
This is a big one.
Okay, I'll buy into these 4 things: values,
Okay.
roles, processes, relationships. Okay, I agree. There is a reason to change our thinking about this, and COVID gives us the excuse for that. This universal, the grand universe reset button. But here I am. I'm just a worker bee in the museum world. I'm not a museum director. I'm not Elon Musk, some independently rich person. Give me a way to hook into these 4 points you raised, Kathy, that I could feel like, even from where I sit in the org chart or the ecosystem, I'm a committed museum worker. I agree that the museum world needs to change. How could I get started with this? Really, where's a place for me to latch onto that?
Well, this just came to me, and it could be a crazy idea. I haven't really thought about it before, but I think a really good project would be to get, and it really triggered me when you said people who are out of work. And my heart goes out to people who, you're not getting a paycheck, and you're not sitting in those deadly meetings and, on Zoom, doing the same old thing over and over again. You're already you're kind of out of it in the field. And for those people, I think there's a different set of things that they need to do. And one of the things is to reach out, maybe contact the Independent Museum Professionals Network, where there are people who are talking about, okay, if you're not in a museum, there are places where you can get help and colleagues to support you, and maybe even ideas for work. But I would say, across the board, if like 20 people signed up, I'm trying to make it really concrete rather than, okay, so let's say out of this, if 20 people signed up and said, okay, I'm up for it, I'll participate in the experiment, we could do an experiment which would address all of these 4 things. And that is, no matter who you are, you work in a museum or you've wanted to work in a museum, you create your own exhibition. And you create it, do it, pick a place that you're going to do it. And maybe it's in the parking lot outside of Walmart's, or maybe it's in in an indoor shopping mall that's open.
You could be like Andrea Jones and pick the fence in her neighborhood and gather her neighbors.
Right. And it could be inside or outside, or you could put up a little tent and, or not a tent, but one of those things with the 4 poles so you wouldn't get moisture on you, and create a little exhibit out of anything. But think of your audience and you think of something that you're really passionate about, and how you would love to have what could be a kind of a physical instantiation of something that got people talking about something in particular, whatever you're interested in. Put out some things to have people look at, maybe even have some questions or prompts or whatever you want to do, and engage in dialogue, and have people could fill out little index cards or something with their opinions or contributions. And maybe it's a generative kind of exhibit where you say, here's an exhibit on, I'm really interested in eggs. We have chickens. I just love eggs. I collect everything eggs. Why am I so interested in eggs? I'm not quite sure, but I'm going to do a thing about eggs. Are you interested in eggs too? And here's some different kinds of eggs, and blah, 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 and just get an egg thing going. I'm back to good eggs again. I don't know how I got to eggs.
Oh, you're creating an extravaganza.
Good eggs, and then document it. Talk to people, get their comments, talk about how many people did it, what were the things that worked, what didn't, and then share it with everyone. Everybody share what was going on there, and were there lessons learned in doing that. You make it a real project, and it's a real museum project, but it's a museum experiment. And what could that experiment actually reveal for all of us? What could we all learn from these experiments? And how might we then say, well, how could we do this within a museum setting?
Well, that's what you just said is why I'm smiling, because, we talked about best practices, looking at existing museums to give people ideas. But what you just described, and what your 4 points, sort of thinking points describe, is really sort of an experiment or a DIY kind of museum or exhibit. And the idea of trying something different outside of the museum, the typical museum situation, is actually, okay, so what can museums learn from these new experiments, like the theatrical performances in the store windows, or Andrea Jones doing the neighborhood exhibit on the fence in the neighborhood, and what can museums learn from that? Because obviously those sorts of experiments and those ways of rethinking roles and processes and values and relationships have resonated.
Yeah.
They were on the news. They were in a report. They got public notice in a positive way because people responded to them. So
one artist somewhere put a little box out in front of her house, and she makes a mini museum, mini exhibition. And now she's got people coming there.
Yeah, that's Andrea. That's Andrea Jones. That's
no, I think it's a box. It's not a
yeah. There are boxes on a fence.
Okay.
Maybe it's somebody. Maybe it's parallel evolution there in different places.
But what's so interesting about all of that is the kind of conviviality that emerges around people coming together and being excited about things that are seemingly, could be, banal in one sense, but are really kind of inspirational in another. And I think it's that eliciting wonder and being directed by wonder yourself. And it doesn't, and these values, roles, processes, and relationships, it doesn't matter. That's not just a museum issue. I think that's what all of society right now is grappling.
Oh yeah. Well, that's any human enterprise for sure. But yeah. I think it's interesting because it, in a way, helps us reconsider what really is essential in a museum or an exhibit situation.
Yeah.
Like if you can't have a building right now for a theater performance or museum exhibition, can you still do something meaningfully with the community And I think obviously the answer is yes.
Absolutely. And right now, again, being sensitive to what's going on in your community is what it's all about. Right now, the one of the main social or kind of exterior kinds of experiences people are having are going to parks, taking walks. So go, and this has been, I mean, this is an idea that was really flourishing in the 60s and the 70s in museums, which was, the storefront museum, the museum on wheels. And that was one of my first jobs at the Oakland Museum is I created exhibitions for the Museum on Wheels, and it went out into the community. And the energy, and that energy is missing from a lot of the on-site museums these days. So why not reconsider, reevaluate, and redefine? And for the people who are working in museums, the big deal here is that if the director or the senior management are not into it, if they're not really leading the charge, you can say, there's nothing I can do because my boss won't let me do it. Well, then I remember at the Denver Museum of Art when I think it was Stephania and some of her colleagues did little displays in the bathroom, and they were like totally, like talk about under the radar. Or I was very inspired when working at the Exploratorium that one of the staff members, who knows who it was, turned the drinking fountain into an exhibit. It had little labels and all kinds of things. It wasn't like the exhibit that the manager said, oh yes, you can spend your FTOs on that. No, I would say for those of you working at home and you're working and you're online Zooming and the structure in your museum is still the same, it doesn't preclude you from doing a little bit of guerrilla museum work. And particularly if it really improves your practice, or if you come up with like a, kind of a brilliant or even not brilliant idea, why not?
Maybe, maybe we will inspire a whole set of Zoom exhibits from this video. Well,
actually, Paul, that's a really good idea.
We'll just put that out there as another possibility for people to reconsider the points you raised. Well, Kathy, I don't want to inadvertently open up the floodgates, but we will put contact information for you and me, to be fair, in this video. So who knows, people might say, all right, well, we saw this video, but let's really talk turkey about this. Let's
I think it would be really a great idea if we did some Zoom exhibits and we shared them with each other.
Okay.
I mean, even if it's
you
just
heard
you
it.
and me.
You heard it. You heard it here first. We're gonna maybe. So we're gonna. This is the part of the story as we end this video that you don't get to see, but we're sort of setting that anticipation. Foreshadowing is the mark of great literature, my English teacher told me. So we're gonna, Kathy and I are gonna do some thinking and maybe open this up, the idea of Zoom exhibits. So if you have an idea for Zoom exhibits, you will work with us on that. You
Yes.
Let us know.
And it could be an individual who doesn't have any work right now and you have time on your hands, or and you're just like aching to get back into doing an exhibit. Go for it. Let us know. Or it could be a museum. It could be somebody, the Met could say, oh, we want to do a Zoom exhibit with you.
Okay, so we're gonna this as always, we have a general idea of where the conversation is gonna go, but I don't know that either of us expected Zoom. We would conclude with Zoom exhibits, but I will say, stay tuned for that. I will say thank you very much to Kathy McLean. As I mentioned, since we are in YouTube land, we will provide links to things we discussed. And if Kathy has a additional resources, since she is an excellent writer and sharer of ideas, she might have some additional resources to share with us in the links. And I guess
Off we go.
off we go, Zoom. Thanks,
Thanks,
Kathy.
Nicole.
Thanks, Kathy.
Thanks.